Welcome to our exhibition, Cornerstones, Robert Arneson and the Brick. In addition to being the gallery's first solo exhibition of Robert Arneson's works, this exhibition is also the first we are aware of to focus solely on Arneson's use of the brick throughout his career. I would like to thank again Tanaya, Kirk, and Derek Arneson of the Arneson Estate for agreeing to the exhibition. It is a pleasure to work with them while putting the show together of their father's works. So, to begin, Robert Arneson began making bricks fairly early in his career and at a formative moment in his development as an artist. To set the stage for how he got there, I'll take you back to when he graduated from Mills College in 1958 with his MFA in ceramics. Under the tutelage of his professor Antonio Prieto, Arneson's MFA show was comprised entirely of plates, vases, bowls, and decorative wall plaques, which is what ceramics were largely known for up to that point in time. They were considered generally as a craft object and as a craft medium. While Arneson was aware of the ceramic sculpture revolution taking place at the Otis Art Institute in Los Angeles, it wasn't until 1959, when Peter Volkos left Otis to move up to UC Berkeley, that Arneson met the leader of the movement. Today, we consider ceramic sculpture as a given in the art world, but back then, anything to do with clay was considered a craft object and not worthy of being considered fine art, and certainly was not a medium for creating sculpture with a capital S. Fully exposed to what Arneson was up to once he had arrived, Arneson began breaking away from the careful craftsmanship he'd been taught by Prieto. This breakaway process continued for several years, with each year of his work moving further and further away from where he had been when he had graduated. As part of this process, Arneson began investigating the history of ceramics and how the medium influenced the development of Western culture. He first hit on the toilet as one of the greatest uses of clay that had been that the Western world had come up with, and then he filtered that through the lens of pop art to create a group of now notorious toilets whose beauty dances along the line of vulgarity, the grotesque, and irreverent bodiness. This first body of work put him on the map both critically in the art world and in the everyday press. I mean, he made the newspaper, and it was somewhat scandalous and shocking to the public at the time. Arneson spent much of the 60s continuing to experiment with the many ideas that came to him. Around 1965, while looking for other common objects with a long history of use, Arneson came upon the humble terracotta brick as another subject for exploring his ideas. Among the first bricks he made were a pair that have fingers emerging from their interior, which finger brick, which is hiding right here in the case, is one of. This surrealist gesture was tied to an earlier series of works that he had made, perhaps the most famous of which is the typewriter that he made, where the keys are all made out of polished fingers, which is now in the Berkeley Art Museum. That was taking pop art and filtering it through the lens of surrealism. Not long after, Arneson produced the corner brick, which is right next to it in the case. And this is the first moment that I know of him stamping his name into the surface of the brick and marking it as one of those first instances of attaching his personal identity to that kind of an object. From there, Arneson went on to make molds of brick forms to help speed up the production process. These first two were made by hand. The third one over there, which is also from 1966, is one of the first that was made in a mold. It is important to note that that 1965 is also the year that Arneson made his very first self-portrait, the genre of sculpture he would later become most celebrated for, of which this is a very classic example. He would not make another until 1971. As the 60s progressed, Arneson's experimentation began to include the addition of conceptual principles, largely inspired by his friend and fellow faculty member at UC Davis, where he taught, William T. Wiley. Through the conceptualist lens, Arneson began to explore the idea of what a brick is and what it could be. The brick as vessel was one concept that emerged, of which over here we have oil brick, where it has oil literally stamped on it, but also Arneson poured into the interior and probably soaked and impregnated its surface with oil itself. I'm not sure what kind of oil. I do know that even after that brick was completed in 1969, it is still sticky to this day on the surface. And this piece is one of a series where Arneson either entombed an object inside of it or impregnated it, as I said, with other substances. Other works from this series include piss brick and foul brick, just to name a few. Those are not in the show, unfortunately, however.
It still smells.
Yes, it has a decaying avian carcass on the interior of it. So, and yes, very much still smells. The brick as homage is another idea that he explored with the Sung edition, which is this set of 10 bricks right here that are glazed in celadon. These are not terracotta bricks, they're actually made out of porcelain. And they were made as an homage to the Sung dynasty ceramicists from China, who were considered the masters of the craft from that time period. Still a third use was the idea of the brick as a canvas, where he would either paint on the surface or add sculptural elements to the brick form. Brick with illusion, which is over here next to oil brick, where you see he's actually painted the image of a brick onto the brick itself. Or over here, we have sinking brick right there, are both examples of where he's embellished the surface. Sometimes these pieces would be studies for later works. Sinking brick, there's a whole series of works that he did like that. But also over here we have mountain brick, which is a study piece for a whole series of mountain-based pieces he did a few years after making this. A fourth way that he explored it was as an erotic object. In this show, these are represented by the two vases that are over here, whose darkly glazed rims and interiors impart a sexual charge to their forms, in particular by the bulge, and with a nice big bulge on the bottom, which alluding to perhaps a human or a female form by chance. Arneson also, in addition to these, made brick pair, which is comprised of two bricks that respectively have male and female genitalia added to them. And they are a matched pair where they will socket into one another. We don't have that piece in the show, unfortunately. It is in the Hammer Museum's collection in Los Angeles. The most important and consequential concept he hit upon, however, was the brick as the surrogate form of self-portrait. This idea manifested itself in a couple of ways, with the first iteration being the Dada-inspired format where Arneson simply stamped his name into the brick, as I mentioned earlier. This is not an entirely unheard of idea in the history of the brick, since many brick-making companies had stamped their names into the bricks for advertising purposes. But what made it different was Arneson's actually imparting it as a form of personal self-portraiture. The other way saw Arneson carving either his likeness into the short ends of the bricks, with face brick, which is hiding over here as being an example, or attaching some other part of his body to the brick, as he did with hand brick, which is sitting right next to it. In particular, in 1981, Arneson made a group of pedestal-mounted brick self-portraits where his image was abstracted into arrangements of bricks stacked and attached to each other at unique angles. This over here is a study piece for one of those pieces. If you come up close, you can see that this is the pedestal that it sits on, and then there's these stacks of bricks. And looking closely, you can see some of them have an eye, some of them have a nose, maybe an ear, for different parts of Bob's face. Concurrent with these series, in the early 1970s, I skipped a paragraph, Arneson began a series of sculptures related to his love of swimming in the waters of the Carquinez Strait along the Benicia shoreline. Represented here on that wall are 4 pieces. He made watercolors, prints, ceramic bricks, and a related maquette from a series, and they're all called sinking bricks. Though I find it interesting that they're sinking when really I see them as swimming, but that's just me. The largest of the sinking brick pieces is actually in the collection of the San Jose Museum of Art. And that it sits about this tall, and the brick is about that big. Concurrent with this series is Arneson created a large-scale installation called Fragment of Western Civilization, which is now in the National Gallery of Australia. We have the maquette for that piece, however, on loan from the estate over here in the corner. This is a very small rendition of it. It fills a space about a quarter the size of this room at least, just to give you a sense of the scale. This piece incorporates the brick as a brick self-portrait. The sculpture takes aim both at the artist's ego, the terracotta brick, and inverts the idea of the monument by presenting it as a pile of ruins. The final theme that the exhibition explores is Arneson's reflections on his life and mortality. As early as 1972, Arneson created a maquette for the unrealized monument for Bob, which is hiding here on the side of this table. Composed of a large brick at the top of a raised platform, also made out of bricks. An opening in the large brick's interior reveals a self-portrait head of the artist, glazed in white. All white self-portraits became a signature motif for Arneson when he was investigating his own mortality, as can be seen in the work right next to it called Blue Eyes, which he made in 1991, a year before he passed away in 1992. The most direct work about Arneson's life in the exhibition is actually what's been hiding behind me this whole time. It's called Bio Bob, which he made in 1982, but later added a couple of more embellishments around 1986, I believe. Comprised of a bronze self-portrait resting atop a ceramic pedestal that is itself standing on a field of bricks, Arneson made this work the ultimate self-portrait of himself, because it's a portrait on top of a portrait on top of a portrait. Embellished into the surface of the ceramic column are many of the important milestones of his life and career: the births of his children, his early notoriety for his toilets, the rejection of the George Moscone Commission, his acquiring his new, right here, you can see him celebrating his new studio in Benicia when they first moved in. Let's see what else is on. Yep, the divorce from his first wife, his parents here. So, and even hiding on here is both his birthday and his social security number. It's been flagged, so it can't be stolen. So, one of the last brick pieces Arneson made during his lifetime was Cornerstone, which is on the top pedestal over there. And I view that piece as kind of a companion to the 1966 Cornerstone over here, as kind of the beginning of and the ends of his career. And the corners, Bob knew that he was dying. He had cancer. He had been fighting it for years. And so in many of his final works, he was thinking about how do I kind of wrap up and kind of complete, my marks while I'm still here. And I think this is a really touching gesture for him to have done that. So combining wit, humor, irreverence, biography, and conceptual principles, Robert Arneson explored the possibilities of the brick through a variety of artistic investigations and in doing so imparted more meaning and elevated this humble object into a bedrock element of his career. Thank you.